part 4 is really, I call the mirror, because it's really where we confront what these systems reveal about our consciousness. And I think this is the part that's most interesting to both you and I. So how do we reclaim our cognitive sovereignty? So I go through what I call the horror liberation cycle of recognition. So like at first, your jaw's open because you're like, how could any of this be real? This sounds so crazy.
Right.
And then you realize it is. And then, I don't know, for me, and everyone's journey is a little different. For me, understanding that once you see through it, once you see this puppet show and realize that you're then being asked to participate in it, that your own mind becomes the or the right over your own mind and your own cognitive sovereignty, I believe, is the fundamental human right of our era.
Right.
And, even in the medical freedom community, we're not talking about this, right? So,
We are.
well, we are. We are.
We
The
are.
broader
Yeah.
we, the broader we most certainly is.
Right. Well, but I think there's been a small group of people talking about this steadily and regularly. And
Yep.
and it's time to broaden the discussion, because even if your goal in health freedom is to achieve certain legal, legislation, you can't get that legislation without overcoming and dealing with this obstacle.
That's exactly right.
So if you're going to be effective at health freedom, you have to understand this and deal with it.
And, sort of like the 12-step thing, recognition is the first step towards
Right.
authentic freedom. You can't possibly take any of this on unless you understand it's happening. And I believe the power starts with the individual mind, and then you can start taking collective action. So, and I think, just, as a fan of Solari and a fan of yours personally, I think it's interesting that you're covering this because it's the same systems thinking approach that you do through financial control mechanisms, just now applied to consciousness and how it's becoming colonized.
So our first Solari report on entrainment technology, which is sort of the more modern electronic subset, was in 2010. And I wanted to do it because of my clients as an investment advisor were being manipulated using entrainment technology.
Wow.
And I couldn't persuade them to protect themselves from it. And I couldn't stop the financial fraud unless they knew it existed. And so my first job was to get them to face the fact that it existed and was being used on them. And as you said, going through that horror grief is
Yep.
step one. So the first the title of the first one was, I think I sent you the link for it, is Entrainment Technology, Subliminal Programming, and Financial Fraud. So that was the focus on stopping people from being defrauded financially. But I also believe that the greatest financial fraud that they're dealing with is vaccine and healthcare injury. And I think mind control contributes to that as well.
Of course it does. I touch on this in part 3 because, I mean, we don't have to relitigate the entirety of COVID, but all the way down the line, from it being based on a fraudulent PCR test to the fact that, the super spreaders who didn't have symptoms, like all the way through,
Right.
it made no sense. And it took some of us a minute to get our sea legs and say, well, why are you allowed to sit down at a restaurant without your mask, but then you stand up? Like, all the stupid things that I think as a society most people can laugh at now. And sadly, I think most people still think, well, they did the best they could. And once you understand and you zoom out and you look at all the systems were geared in one particular direction with one particular outcome, it becomes quite obvious that this is a crime.
Right.
And possibly the biggest crime against humanity we've ever seen. And
Certainly the greatest economic taking we've seen so far, although they're cooking up to a bigger one.
it seems like the warm up, and you and I agree on that.